The blizzard that engulfs Oxford Castle on that December night in 1142 is so fierce that Stephen's sentries huddle by their fires, blind to the three figures moving like ghosts through the swirling snow. Wrapped in white cloaks that render them nearly invisible against the blanketing whiteness, they creep past the siege lines with agonizing slowness. Each footfall has to be perfectly placed. One snapped branch, one crunching misstep on the ice, and England's civil war will end tonight. The lead figure is small, moving with desperate purpose despite exhaustion that threatens to buckle her knees. This is Matilda, rightful Queen of England to her supporters, usurper and she-wolf to her enemies. For 3 months, King Stephen's army has strangled Oxford Castle in an iron grip, starving out the last major stronghold of her cause. Behind her, 2 knights struggle to match her pace while scanning for torchlight through the blizzard. The frozen Thames stretches before them, a ribbon of treacherous ice that might crack and swallow them, or might carry them to freedom. Stephen's men are everywhere, warming themselves by fires mere yards away, patrolling the riverbank, certain that no one would dare attempt to escape on such a brutal night. They are wrong. What happens during these harrowing hours will become one of medieval England's most legendary escapes, and the chronicles will record it with awe. But how does a besieged queen slip past hundreds of enemy soldiers who are specifically watching for her? Why would she risk everything on such a suicidal dash across thin winter ice when surrender seems her only option? And how did this single desperate escape alter the entire future of the English monarchy? You're listening to The Crow's Tales, and this is Empress Matilda's Great Escape. Three months earlier, Oxford Castle stood like a stone fist raised against the autumn sky, its towers commanding the Thames Valley with stubborn defiance. Inside its walls, Empress Matilda paced the great hall, her boots echoing against cold stone. She had held this fortress for nearly 3 years, one of the last loyal strongholds in a kingdom tearing itself apart. But now, through the narrow windows, she could see the first of Stephen's banners appearing on the horizon. The siege of Oxford was about to begin, and with it, perhaps the final chapter of England's civil war. A conflict so devastating that chroniclers would later simply call it the Anarchy. Matilda's claim to wear England's crown was written in both blood and law. She was the daughter of Henry I, one of England's most powerful monarchs, but her path to power had taken an extraordinary detour through the highest courts of Europe. At just 8 years old, she had been sent to Germany to marry the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, a political alliance that made her the Empress of the German states at 12. For 11 years, she had ruled beside him, learning the art of governance in one of Europe's most sophisticated courts. When Emperor Henry died in 1125, Matilda returned to her father's court as a 23-year-old widow, carrying the imperial title she would never relinquish. Empress she had been, and Empress she would remain. Even after her second marriage to Geoffrey of Anjou, a boy of 14 when she, at 25, had been forced to wed him for a political alliance. The title was more than pride. It was a reminder that she had already ruled half of Christendom. Why should England be beyond her? Her father Henry had lost his only legitimate son when the White Ship sank in 1120, taking the heir to England down into the cold Channel waters. Faced with no male heir, Henry had done the unthinkable. He named his daughter his successor and forced his barons to swear holy oaths, accepting her as England's next ruler. Some had sworn multiple times, as if repetition could make the unprecedented acceptable. But when Henry died in 1135, those oaths proved as brittle as ice. His nephew, Stephen of Blois, raced from Bologna to London with almost treasonous speed. Within 3 weeks, before Matilda could even cross from Normandy, he had convinced the Archbishop of Canterbury to place the crown on his head. His argument was simple and appealing to the Norman barons. England needed a warrior king, not a woman's rule, no matter how imperial her title. What followed was not a clean civil war with clear sides, but a messy fracturing of loyalty that shifted like sand. The great magnates of England initially accepted Stephen's coup, but cracks appeared almost immediately. Matilda's half-brother, Robert, Earl of Gloucester, one of Henry I's many bastards but perhaps his most capable child, declared for his sister. Robert controlled vast estates in the west, and his defection created a rival power base. The church split between pragmatists who accepted Stephen's coronation and idealists who remembered their oaths to Henry. The Bishop of Winchester, Stephen's own brother, would switch sides twice during the conflict, each time claiming God's guidance. The northern barons largely stayed neutral, using the chaos to rule their lands like independent kingdoms. The Welsh princes gleefully raided both sides. Scotland invaded repeatedly, its king claiming to support Matilda while grabbing as much northern territory as possible. Oxford Castle itself became the linchpin of Matilda's strategy, a fortress that commanded more than just stone and mortar. Built by the Normans in 1071 on the west side of Oxford town, it controlled the vital crossing points of the Thames and stood at the intersection of major roads linking London to the West Country. The castle's massive stone tower, rising nearly 60 feet, could be seen for miles across the flat Thames Valley, while its Motte and Bailey design made it nearly impregnable to direct assault. More than just a military strongpoint, Oxford controlled the rich agricultural heartland of central England and threatened to slice Stephen's southeastern power base from his supporters in the Midlands. Whoever held Oxford held a dagger to the throat of their enemy's supply lines. By 1139, when Matilda finally landed in England to press her claim, the kingdom had already descended into localised warfare. Her strongholds formed the diagonal line across England, the southwest, where Robert of Gloucester held sway, and the Welsh marches, where her supporters could retreat into the hills. The war seesawed dramatically. In 1141, Matilda had actually captured Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln, where he had fought with incredible bravery, wielding a Danish axe when his sword broke, before being struck down by a stone to the helmet. For 8 glorious months, Matilda ruled as England's de facto queen, even preparing for a coronation at Westminster. But she had overplayed her hand, alienating London's citizens with demands for money, and when Stephen's wife, also named Matilda confusingly, rallied his supporters and threatened the capital, the Empress had been forced to flee so hastily she left her dinner half-eaten on the table. The exchange of prisoners that followed, Stephen for Robert of Gloucester, who had been captured at Winchester, reset the board. Now, a year later, Stephen had learned patience, and he would finally take Oxford not by storm, but by hunger. Stephen's army spread around Oxford's walls like floodwater that September, cutting every road, blocking every path. This was not the eager usurper of 1135, but a king weathered by 7 years of inconclusive warfare. He had brought an enormous host, knights from his strongholds in the southeast, Flemish mercenaries whose crossbows were feared across Europe, and engineers who immediately began constructing the machinery of siege warfare. Inside Oxford Castle, Matilda commanded perhaps 300 men, loyal soldiers who had followed her through 7 years of war. They expected Stephen to attempt an assault, to bloody his army against Oxford's formidable walls before winter forced his withdrawal. Instead, he settled down for a long siege, his men building wooden huts and stockpiling supplies stripped from the surrounding countryside. The message was clear: he would wait all winter if necessary. By October, the mathematics of siege warfare began their grim work. Oxford had not been provisioned for a months-long siege. The garrison had expected to hold out for weeks, not seasons. As November brought its frosts, Matilda ordered strict rationing. A handful of grain per man per day, weak ale to prevent disease, precious little else. The war horses, those symbols of knightly power, were slaughtered first, their meat carefully salted and stored. The winter of 1142 came early and viciously. By December, the Thames had frozen solid enough to support the weight of armoured knights, a rare occurrence that would be remembered in chronicles. Inside Oxford, men were collapsing at their posts, too weak from hunger to stand watch in the bitter cold. They had perhaps 2 weeks of food remaining. Stephen, meanwhile, tightened his grip with methodical patience. His men had completely encircled the castle, building a wooden bridge across the frozen Thames to link their positions. They intercepted every attempt to bring supplies into the castle. The executions of captured smugglers were carried out in full view of Oxford's walls. Stephen wanted Matilda to understand that no relief was coming. It was now that disturbing rumours reached Matilda's ears. Stephen's counsellors were debating her fate when the castle inevitably fell. Some urged magnanimity. She was, after all, the daughter of their former king. Others, remembering the years of warfare, urged harsher measures. The charge of treason was easily made against a woman who had challenged a crowned king. At best, she might expect exile. At worst, imprisonment in chains. A fate that would destroy not just her cause, but the legitimacy of her son Henry's future claim. On the night of December 18th, with snow falling steadily, Matilda stands outside the great hall, delaying her entrance. She has just come from the storeroom, a journey she makes every night now, counting and recounting what remains. 3 sacks of grain, each light enough that even in her weakened state she can lift. 42 pounds of flour, weevil infested. A barrel of ale so watered down it's barely distinguishable from melted snow. The salted meat had been gone for a week. They're down to the strips of leather cut from spare saddles, boiled into a grey soup that fools the stomach for an hour at most. She presses her palms against the cold stone wall, using the shock of it to clear her head. The numbers run constantly. 300 men, 42 pounds of grain, 14 pounds per day at starvation rations, 3 days, maybe 4 if they cut rations again. But men are already collapsing on watch. 2 died yesterday, officially from cold, but everyone knows it was hunger that got them. Her fingers find the worn silk of her dress, one of the last remnants of her imperial finery. The purple fabric, once rich enough to buy a village, is now threadbare at the cuffs where she picks at them through every anxious council meeting. She has cut pieces from the hem to trade with the garrison's women for their bread rations, maintaining the fiction that the Empress eats better than her men. In truth, she has been living on hot water flavoured with herbs for 3 days. She pushes open the heavy oak door with both hands, needing to use her full body weight. Her arms no longer have the strength for casual gestures. The hall tells its own story of desperation. The great fire that should roar with warming flames holds only glowing embers. They are burning furniture now, and tonight she recognises pieces of the chapel altar in the dying flames. The elaborate tapestries that once decorated the walls have been taken down, cut up for blankets. Ice crystals form on the inside of the windows, and every breath emerges as vapour in the freezing air. Around the table sits the remnants of her court. Robert of Gloucester, her half-brother and most loyal supporter, whose face has grown gaunt from the same starvation rations he insists on sharing with his men. Brian Fitzcount, the Lord of Wallingford Castle, the last truly secure fortress in her network, its walls too formidable for Stephen to besiege while Oxford still stands. Fitzcount has held it for her throughout the war, turning it into an impregnable sanctuary, though now he keeps rubbing his jaw where 2 teeth has fallen out, scurvy beginning its work. Beyond these 2 great lords, only a handful of household knights remain, men whose loyalty has transcended reason, who will starve with their empress rather than seek Stephen's peace. Matilda moves to the head of the table with deliberate slowness, each step measured to hide the slight shake in her legs. Yesterday, she fainted trying to climb the tower stairs. She can't afford to show that weakness here. As she sits, she spreads her hands flat on the scarred wood, pressing down hard to stop them trembling. She begins by acknowledging what everyone knows. They have food for perhaps 10 days, less if they maintain full watches. The options are discussed with the grim efficiency of veterans who have seen too many sieges. Surrender is possible, but Stephen's counsellors are known to be divided between exile and imprisonment for the woman who had cost them 7 years of war. The garrison at Shrewsbury had surrendered on promise of safe conduct. Stephen hanged them all anyway, claiming that they were traitors, not legitimate combatants. A sortie is suggested by one of the younger knights, but Robert of Gloucester's slow shake of the head ends that fantasy. Men too weak to properly lift swords cannot break through prepared lines. When Brian Fitzcount tries to demonstrate a sword thrust and can't lift his arm above his shoulder height, the point is made without words. They discuss eating the rats, but the rats have been gone for 2 weeks. Even they couldn't survive in a starving castle. Someone mentions the castle's old dog, but it disappeared days ago, probably already in someone's pot. They're down to boiling leather and scraping lichens off the walls. One knight tried eating candle wax yesterday and is still vomiting bile. The silence that follows is as heavy as the snow falling outside. Matilda stands abruptly, unable to sit still, and moves to the narrow window. Outside, Stephen's campfires dot the landscape like a constellation of threats. She counts them silently, a nervous habit she's developed, her fingers tapping against her thigh with each fire. 20, 30, 50, too many. But tonight she notices something else. The smell of cooking meat drifting from the siege lines. Stephen's men are roasting venison. The smell is torture, her mouth flooding with saliva her body can't spare. She begins to pace, 5 steps to the fireplace, 5 steps back, her hands clasped behind her back, so tightly that her fingernails dig crescents into her palms. The movement fights off the grey fog that keeps creeping into the edges of her vision, the beginning of starvation's final phase. On the 3rd circuit, she stops at the dying embers, watching the last of their furniture burn to ash. Even God's altar isn't sacred anymore. What's left to sacrifice? When she finally turns to face them, her proposal stuns the room into absolute silence. The Thames is frozen. The blizzard that makes the siege even more miserable also provide cover. A small group, 3, perhaps 4 people dressed in white, might slip through the lines on foot under cover of the storm. The audacity of it violates every principle of noble warfare. Queens don't flee on foot through blizzards like common thieves. It's beneath royal dignity, dangerous beyond measure, and their only real chance. She presses her signet ring, the one bearing the imperial seal, hard into her palm, using the pain to focus her thoughts. The ring is loose now. She's wrapped thread around it to keep it from sliding off her skeletal finger. That ring represents everything. Her father's legacy, her imperial past, her son's future. If she dies here, it'll be pried from her corpse as proof of Stephen's victory. Her decision is made. She would rather freeze in a ditch as a free woman than surrender her son's inheritance from a warm prison cell. The storm that would save or doom them arrived on December 21st like an answered prayer. By afternoon, snow fell in sheets so thick that Oxford Castle's towers vanished into grey nothing at 50 paces. The wind screamed through the battlements, driving ice horizontally through the air with such force that exposed skin burned with cold. It was perfect. Inside her chambers, Matilda worked by candlelight, her fingers moving with desperate efficiency as she made final adjustments to the white cloaks. The genius of them was their simplicity. Rough white cloth that would render the wearer nearly invisible against the snow. Not sewn with any skill, just functional enough to drape over their bodies and break up their human silhouettes. She had sacrificed altar cloths from the chapel, her own white undergarments, anything that could serve this single purpose. 2 knights have been chosen for the escape. Roger de Petre, a grizzled veteran who knows every track and road in the south of England, and Ralph de Beaufort, younger but proven in a dozen skirmishes. Roger has mapped out their route with grim precision, 6 miles through the snow to Abingdon a small manor house whose lord still remains loyal to Matilda's cause. There, they can obtain horses for the final 10 miles to Wallingford, Brian Fitzcount's impregnable fortress. On foot in a blizzard, even reaching Abingdon seems impossible, but attempting the full 16 miles to Wallingford without horses would be suicide. The plan requires them to survive 2 stages of hell, not just one. As darkness deepened, the 3 gathered in Matilda's chambers for the last time. She had already transformed herself, abandoning the heavy robes of an empress for the practical leather and wool of a common soldier. The clothes hung loose on her frame. 3 months of siege had carved away any softness from her body. Her hair was bound tight against her skull, hidden beneath a leather cap. In the dim light, she could have been any anonymous fighter preparing for a raid. The storm intensified as midnight approached, rattling the shutters with such violence it seemed like the castle might blow away. Through the narrow windows, Stephen's watchfires were barely visible, orange blurs in the white chaos, struggling to stay lit. The sentries would be huddled close to whatever warmth they could find, their eyes useless in the driving snow. Robert of Gloucester entered without knocking, his face a mask of controlled anguish. Her half-brother would stay behind to maintain the deception, ensuring guards remained at the door, that servants brought food, and candles burned in her windows. The presence might buy hours, perhaps even a day before Stephen realised his prize had vanished. They stood facing each other in the flickering candlelight, unable to embrace or speak. Even here, even now, they couldn't risk servants overhearing. But his eyes said everything: pride, fear, desperate hope. She pressed his hand once, firmly, then turned away. Some farewells were too heavy for words. The descent begins in the castle's lower passages, stone corridors that run beneath the great hall like the roots of an ancient tree. These passages are older than the normal castle above, perhaps Roman, perhaps Saxon. No one knows for certain. Water seeps through the stones, forming ice that makes every step treacherous. The torch Roger carries throws wild shadows that leap at them from every corner. They move in absolute silence, communicating only through touches and gestures. Every sound magnifies in these tunnels. A scraping boot, a catching breath, the whisper of cloth against stone. Above them, they can hear the garrison, footsteps on the floors overhead, muffled conversations. Someone coughing with the persistent hack of the siege-sick. The passage narrows as they descend, forcing them to move single file. Matilda goes second, between the 2 knights, her hand on Roger's shoulder for guidance. The darkness is total now. They have extinguished the torch rather than risk its light being seen through some crack or arrow slit. They navigate by touch and memory, fingers trailing along slimy walls, feet testing each step before committing weight. The postern gate looms before them like the mouth of a cave. This small door, barely wide enough for a single person, is Oxford's secret. Meant for messengers and spies, not queens. Ralph eases it open with agonising slowness. The hinges, despite careful oiling that afternoon, groan like a living thing in pain. They freeze, listening for any cry of alarm, any sign they've been heard. Nothing. Only the howling wind. The storm hits them like a physical blow when they step outside. The cold is beyond description. It seems to pierce straight through cloth and flesh to freeze the very marrow. Snow drives into their faces with such force they have to turn away just to breathe. Within seconds, Matilda's eyelashes are heavy with ice. But the storm is their ally. 10 feet from the castle walls and they're already invisible, swallowed by the white chaos. They pull on the white cloaks, the cloth immediately catching the wind and whipping around them. Roger leads them forward, navigating by instinct and memory through a landscape transformed by snow into something alien. Stephen's siege works sprawl around Oxford like a vast spider's web. Trenches, palisades, wooden towers, and hundreds of tents and lean-tos sheltering his army. In daylight, it would be impossible to navigate unseen. But now, in the storm, it becomes a maze of shadows and confusion. They creep between snow-buried earthworks, every step calculated. The white cloaks work better than Matilda dared hope. From even a few feet away, they vanish into swirling snow. But the danger is constant. Stephen has posted sentries through his lines, men who will raise the alarm at any unusual movement. Watchfires glow like demons' eyes in the darkness, each one representing soldiers who might look up just at the wrong moment. They're threading between two siege towers when it happens. A torch suddenly swings towards them. Its light cutting through the storm like a blade. A sentry, making his rounds despite the weather, has heard something. Perhaps the crunch of snow, perhaps the whisper of cloth. He stands not 20 feet away, torch held high, peering into the darkness. Matilda freezes instantly, every muscle locked. The white cloak settles around her, and she becomes as still as the snow-covered debris surrounding them. Beside her, she senses rather than sees Ralph's hand move to his dagger. If the sentry comes closer, if he raises an alarm, they'll have to kill him, quickly and silently, though that will only delay the discovery when his body was found. The sentry takes a step forward, then another. His torch wavers in the wind, throwing wild shadows that make everything seem to move. He's looking directly at them now, squinting through the driving snow. Another step. Matilda can see his face clearly, young, bearded, ice forming on his eyebrows. His free hand moves to his sword hilt. Her heart hammers so loudly, she's certain he must hear it. Every instinct screams at her to run, but she remains frozen, trusting the snow and the white cloak to hide her. Roger and Ralph are equally still, three white statues in the white world. The sentry's eyes narrow. He's seen something, or thinks he has. He raises the torch higher and takes another step. Then a massive gust of wind strikes like a giant's fist. Snow explodes around them in a blinding cloud. The sentry's torch gutters and nearly dies. He curses, turning back to the wind to shield the flame, and in that moment of distraction, the three figures move. Not quickly, sudden movement would draw the eye, but steadily, gliding through the snow like ghosts. When the sentry turns back, torch rekindled, there's nothing to see but swirling white and the vague shapes of siege equipment. He stares for another long moment, then shakes his head and mutters something lost in the wind. The cold is brutal. No one can blame him for not investigating every shadow. He turns back towards the warmth of the nearest watchfire, never knowing how close he came to ending the war. They wait until the torch is a distant blur before moving again. Heart still racing from the near miss. Ralph's hand comes away from his dagger, and Matilda realizes her own fingers have found the small knife at her belt. They were a breath away from violence, from discovery, from disaster. But they've survived. The storm has saved them. They press on. The encampment seems endless. Every shadow could hide a sentry. Every sound might bring investigation. They pass so close to one watchfire that Matilda can hear the soldiers talking, complaining about the cold, about the endless siege, about Stephen's refusal to simply storm the castle and be done with it. One man is telling a crude joke about what they'll do when Oxford falls, when they finally get their hands on the she-wolf who has caused so much trouble. Matilda moves past them, close enough to see their faces, to count the icicles in their beard. They never once look up from their fire. After what feels like hours but is perhaps 30 minutes, the siege works begin to thin. The watchfires grow more distant, and then, through the storm, Matilda hears a sound that will make her blood freeze more than any cold: the groaning of ice. The Thames appears before them like a scar across the world. In daylight, it would be white and gleaming, obviously frozen. But in the darkness, with snow obscuring everything, it's a black void that moans and whispers with its own voice. The river is fighting its frozen prison, and the ice is answering with creaks and cracks that sound like bones breaking. More terrifying still are the sentries posted along its banks. Stephen knows the frozen river is a potential escape route. Torches mark guard posts every 100 yards, and Matilda can see dark figures moving between them. These aren't the cold, distracted sentries of the inner siege works. These men are alert, watching specifically for any attempt to cross. Roger touches her shoulder, points to a section of bank between two guard posts. The gap is perhaps 50 yards, not much, but in the storm it might be enough. They'll have to time their crossing perfectly, moving when both sentries are turned away, trusting the storm to hide them on the open ice. Ralph goes first, belly crawling down the bank until he reaches the ice edge. He tests it with his hand, pressing down gradually. Even from where he crouches, Matilda can hear the ice protest, a grinding, threatening sound. But it holds. He slithers onto the surface and begins crawling forward, dispersing his weight as much as possible. The sentries continue their patrols, unaware. The storm is, if anything, growing stronger. Visibility is down to perhaps 10 feet. Roger gestures. Matilda's turn. She moves down the bank, the snow immediately soaking through her clothes where she presses against it. The cold is beyond feeling now. Her body has passed through the pain stage, into a strange numbness. At the ice's edge, she pauses. The Thames has been her friend once, a highway for supplies and reinforcement. Now, it's one more enemy to overcome. She places her gloved hand on the ice. It's rough, wind-scoured, covered with a thin layer of snow that has partially melted and refrozen into a treacherous glaze. Through her palm she can feel the river's power, imprisoned but not conquered. One warm day, one crack in the wrong place, and the Thames will swallow them without trace. Empress Matilda, who once commanded the wealth of the German states, who was steps away from coronation at Westminster, who has fought 7 years for her birthright, places her knee on the groaning ice of the Thames. The surface crackles beneath her weight, a spiderweb of sound spreading outward. She pushes forward with another leg, committing herself fully to the crossing. There's no going back now. Behind her, Oxford Castle disappears into the storm. Ahead lies only darkness, ice, and the thin hope of survival. They've covered perhaps a third of the distance when Ralph suddenly raises his fist, the signal to freeze. He's staring at something in the ice beneath him. Matilda crawls forward, carefully until she can see what had stopped him. There's a hole in the ice, perhaps 3 feet across, partially drifted over with snow but still visible as a dark wound in the white surface. The edges are smooth, melted and refrozen. This didn't happen today, but this is what makes Matilda's blood freeze. Beneath the thin skin of new ice covering the hole, suspended in the dark water below, is a pale shape. A face, eyes open, mouth agape in a final gasp. Someone else tried to cross here. The Thames took them and kept them, a warning preserved in the ice. Roger touches her shoulder, points left away from the hole and its grim guardian. But as they shift course, they realise why the ice broke there. They're moving towards the centre of the river where the current runs strongest, where the ice is thinnest. The safe route along the edges would take them directly past the guard posts, their torches clearly visible through the snow. The dangerous route through the middle is their only option. The ice here sings constantly, not the occasional groan of stable ice, but a continuous whisper of stress and strain. Matilda can feel it flexing beneath her weight, bouncing slightly like a wooden floor. Black water is visible through cracks that spiderweb in every direction. Some are old, frozen solid. Others weep liquid water that wasn't there moments before. Then comes the sound she'll hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. A crack like whip strike followed by a grinding roar. Not beneath her, but ahead, where Ralph has been crawling. The ice tilts, a whole section the size of a cottage floor suddenly angling down. Ralph doesn't cry out, there's no time. He slides towards the growing gap, hands scrabbling for purchase on smooth ice. Roger lunges forward, grabbing Ralph's cloak just as he goes over the edge to his waist. The current catches him immediately, trying to drag him under the ice shelf. Roger hauls back, boots sliding on the ice, and Matilda grabs Roger's belt, adding her weight to the anchor. For terrible seconds, they're losing. The Thames is stronger than 2 starving people. Ralph's face is already blue, his hands losing their grip. Then his boot finds something, perhaps a ridge in the ice, perhaps the body of whoever fell in before. He kicks up, Roger pulls and Ralph comes out of the water like a birthed seal. gasping and shaking. But there's no time for recovery. The crack is widening and the entire ice sheet is breaking apart. They scramble away from the fracture, moving on hands and knees, no longer caring about stealth. Behind them, the ice collapses entirely with a sound like thunder. On both banks, torches begin moving. The guards have definitely heard that. Shouts echo across the river, but the storm is their ally still. The guards can hear something that has happened, but can't see what or where. Ralph's soaked clothes are already freezing solid, turning him into a figure of ice. He can't stop shaking, his body going into shock from the cold. They have to get across now, before he loses the ability to move at all. They half crawl, half slither towards the north bank, following the strongest looking ice, praying with each movement that it will hold. The final yards are the worst. The ice near the banks is rotten, weakened by reeds and the slightly warmer water where the river is shallow. It breaks constantly under their weight, forcing them to spread out, to distribute the load. Matilda's hands plunge through several times, the shock of freezing water electric up her arms. But finally, blessedly, Roger's hands find solid ground. Real earth. He hauls himself up, then turns to pull Ralph, who is barely conscious, his lips blue-black in the darkness. He drags him up the bank, then reaches for Matilda. As she grabs Roger's hands, the ice she's been lying on simply disappears. One moment solid, the next gone. Black water surging where her body was seconds before. They collapse on the bank, gasping. Ralph curled up in a ball trying to generate any warmth. Behind them, the Thames roars its frustration, denied its prey by seconds. They can hear Stephen's guards shouting to each other across the water, some even venturing onto the ice to investigate. But the storm hides the three figures in white who are already forcing themselves to their feet. But 6 miles of frozen hell still lie between them and Abingdon. The walls of Abingdon materialised from the storm like an apparition. When the gates opened and the guards saw who stood between the two knights, the Empress herself, whom all of England believed trapped in Oxford, several men actually stepped back in shock. But Abingdon was too close to Stephen's lines. Within an hour, despite Matilda barely being conscious, they were mounted on horses and racing for the safety of Wallingford. She remembers nothing of that final ride. Tied to her saddle, wrapped in furs, existing somewhere between life and death. When Brian Fitzcount carries her through Wallingford's gates, when warmth finally touches her frozen skin, when she hears him shouting for hot wine and physicians, she knows she has done it. She has survived the impossible. For the first time in 3 months, Matilda allows her body to surrender, not to death, but to the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has finally reached safety. Stephen maintained the siege of Oxford for 2 more days before realising something was wrong. When his soldiers finally entered Matilda's chambers, Robert of Gloucester, having negotiated surrender to save the garrison, they found her bed stuffed with straw, her jewels arranged on the table, and candles burned to nothing. Stephen's rage was spectacular, but beneath it lay something worse: humiliation. He had boasted that Matilda was finished. Now she had slipped through his fingers in the most impossible way, making him look like a fool before his entire army. The psychological blow was devastating. If she could escape from certain capture, was victory ever truly possible? The escape transformed Matilda from a defeated claimant into legend. Every chronicle seized upon it. This impossible flight through a blizzard, crawling across ice while hundreds of soldiers slept. It became proof that her cause had divine favour, that Stephen could never truly win while she lived. But the real significance was dynastic. Had Matilda surrendered at Oxford, any terms would have included renouncing her son Henry's claim to the throne. Instead, her escape kept the civil war grinding on until Stephen, exhausted and with his own son dead, had no choice but to name Henry as his heir. When Henry took the throne in 1154, founding the Plantagenet dynasty that would rule for 3 centuries, he brought more than just a new royal line to England. Through his mother's bloodline and his father's conquest of Normandy, through his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry assembled the Angevin Empire, a territory stretching from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. England was no longer an isolated kingdom, but the jewel in a continental superpower. The Plantagenet line, Richard the Lionheart, Edward III, Henry V, all would rule because 3 figures in white cloaks vanished into a blizzard. Matilda herself lived another 25 years, long enough to see her son crowned, to see the anarchy end, to see the birth of an empire she had preserved through one desperate night. She never returned to England, but sometimes, in her comfortable exile in Normandy, she would unconsciously rub her fingers, the ones that never quite recovered their feeling from that frozen night. The kingdom that had rejected her as queen remembered her for something perhaps greater, as the woman who walked through hell in a white cloak and emerged into legend. In the end, that December night gave England its future, and it all balanced on ice that cracked but held, on sentries who looked but didn't see, on a woman who kept walking when everything in her body begged her to stop. 3 white shadows against white snow. That's all it took to change history. Well then, there you have it. If you've watched this far and like what you've heard, then consider liking and subscribing. Also, you can hit the notification bell if you want to be notified of future stories. I release a new one every Sunday. As a new channel, this really helps not only push these stories in front of more of you lovely people, but helps reassure me I'm not just sending these off into the ether, never to be seen again. If you've listened this far and don't like what you've heard, then, what on earth are you doing? Right then, off you pop. Thanks for listening.